everyone. We have the first session, which is essentially about strategies for managing a multi-generational workforce. What we do know of multi-generational workforce, this is essentially a concept that came out from the US after the Second World War, when a very distinctive generation was seen. So after the Second World War, baby boomers as a generation emerged. These were the people who broke out of traditional homes, they started living on their own. There was a massive growth in the economy and these people populated that. And they developed distinctive traits and behaviors which came to be identified as baby boomers generation. US Census Bureau established baby boomers as a generation that started in 1946 and then went up till 1986. Please note, this is the only time when the US Census Bureau actually established a start and a finish to a generation. After that, they have not established any generational norms. It's just that the research became so popular that every 20 years started becoming a cohort for people to start comparing generations in. So from 1964 onwards, somewhere around that time, the next 20 years came to be called as Gen X. This was also fairly distinctive. There were some distinctive traits, but some of this started merging with national traits, organizational traits, cultural traits. So it was harder to ascribe entire generation into a certain trait. But there was nothing from the US Census Bureau which defined the start and the finish to this generation. It's just that this research also became popular for a while. And then we had Gen Y, which started sometime in 1986 and goes on till by different people have different views, 2004, 2002 and so on. And this is also overlapping with another term which became a media creation which was very popular, which was millennials. Now, everyone's unsure when did Gen Y start, when does it overlap with millennials, and subsequently when does Gen Z start. So in case people have different views or they have definitive views, let me just say the view of the panel is there are generational differences, but it's very hard to quantify when did what start and when did what end. We've seen baby boomers were traditionally seen as people who were very determined, who were savers, who changed the workplaces, they modernized them. And in fact, in my view, this is a common trait that we've seen for all new generations that emerge. They make space for themselves. They adopt newer technologies, newer protocols of communication, newer ways of interaction, and they bring those changes to the organization and force them to adapt. This is something which is true for every generation. It's just that the distinctive aspects of each generation are brought in and say that they are different. Some people say they are good, some people say they are bad. Most people agree that they are full of challenges. Some people say this is just generation gap, and these are just the issues that we face, any organization will have to face. So that's my 2 bits on the context of this conversation. Just a little more flavor to what I've just shared. Would anyone else like to share on the research?
Well, I just wanted to add one liner to what you said. See, there are different research papers available on this topic, and sometimes they give very different viewpoints. So maybe what we need to be cognizant about is that it's important for us to really go through that research and find out that what really makes sense for our context. And that's a very important point if you are really designing about any strategy or any kind of interventions you are planning to do in the organizations. So that's my beat on this. And so therefore the moot point is that these researches need to be really filtered through the context and the cultural setting before we decide to make a strategy on this point.
Basically, most of this research which is available in the public domain is the one from US. We need to look at the same research from an Indian perspective, because what's good for US may not be good for India, because each generation are born and brought up in different social conditions and different, what should I say, ecosystems. So how the country has been progressing. For example, what I've gone through is, I've gone through an era where everything is in short supply. If I'll have to buy a scooter, a Bajaj scooter, I think you represent Bajaj. So I need to apply 5 years in advance and wait for that. If I'll have to apply for a land telephone, I'll have to apply that and wait for 5 years to get a land telephone. So I've been born and brought up in a scarcity environment, and my mind is always, oh, what will happen tomorrow? I need to always be thrift oriented, and I'll have to save for a rainy day. So this is the kind of a background with which I've grown up. But if I tell the new generation, the millennials or the Gen Z we are talking about, they would laugh at us because they will say, you just walk into any mobile shop, buy a mobile in 5 minutes, or you choose a variety of two-wheelers or cars for that matter. So it's a completely different cultural mindset these people are actually grown up to be used to. So we'll have to look at from that lens also when we are talking about different generations. So I think that's what I would like to add.
Rajiv.
So from, who's actually labeling it? That is more important to look at. The labeling is happening either by the earlier part of the Generation Y or Generation X or maybe baby boomers. Because from their perspective, their upbringing actually had different perspectives altogether. So when we look at Generation X or baby boomers, there was a lot of hardship which they had to go through. The means to living were very limited. It was like, clothes, shelter, and food. But now, when we look at the new generation, their perspective has been very different. They have born with technology around. They have born with conveniences because their parents were from either baby boomers or Generation X who had already established themselves with all the hardship. But they have provided convenience to their children. Now, because of that change in the approach, they actually label these people that, okay, they do not value certain things, they are impatient, they want everything very quick and fast. Whereas the fact remains, when you talk to this kind of people, this particular generation, which is Generation Y, to some extent millennials or even Generation Z, from their perspective, they want agility. They want everything quick because they have never stood in the shop, ration shop particularly, waited for a long time to even get the, whatever stuff we used to get there. So it's actually the perspective. And the labeling is happening by the predecessors generations, not by the people. For them, they are absolutely right, actually.
Right. So I think let's start getting into the crux of the issue. So Naresh, would you mind sharing with us what are the challenges that we're seeing of a multi-generational workforce?
If you look at employees in an organization, what are the common aspects which they look for when they actually go out to work? They look for a good manager who is interested in developing them, who is interested in actually coaching them, who is interested in empowering them, allowing them the space, and also who is interested basically to allow them the freedom to operate. Besides that, every generation, irrespective of which generation they belong to, they need respect. And I don't think anyone would disagree with me. They not only respect, but an appreciation for a good work done. So these are all the common aspects which run across generations. Nevertheless, I would hasten to add that there's no one size fits all. When it comes to launching some programs in an organization, despite these uniformity across generations, we need to understand from the background they come from. For example, if I'm planning to roll out a benefit program in my organization, how do I actually look at this benefits program, which is relevant to generations which are across the organization? Take the case of the health insurance, which is being debated widely now. So if I have someone from a Gen X or a baby boomer, what is that he would look at for health insurance? Maybe he would like to cover himself, his wife, and his children. But if you look at employees from the millennials or Gen Z, they may not be yet married. They don't have a family. What they look at is coverage of their parents, and maybe there is a freedom, flexibility to actually work around the benefits which are available under a health insurance plan. And irrespective of all these, people are today looking at wellness programs. So this is something which has come into vogue in the last 2-3 years because organizations started believing that a healthy employee is a more productive employee. So like doctors, availability of doctors on site, the services of a nutritionist, then you have subscription, company paid subscription to a gym, whatever. There are different benefits available to us, which basically attracts people from different generations and motivates them differently. Second aspect I am going to talk about is the communication. How do you understand the preferred way of communication for people across different generation. A baby boomer like me would love to have a face-to-face communication. I would still love to be part of a town hall. But you look at the younger generation today, it's instant messaging. And it's actually the corporate live presentations or emails. These are the preferred way of communication. So as HR professionals, we need to be alive to this situation. Or how do we have different modes of communication to reach out to the people of different generations at the workplace? The third thing which we can talk about is how do you choose people for working on some projects, the company projects? There was an interesting case study published by Harvard Business Review recently, which took the case of MasterCard. I don't know any of you are from MasterCard here, where they actually put some younger employees and the older employees in a project. The idea is the younger generation would actually equip the older generation to understand technology better, because the younger generation are actually digital natives, or they are so, I think, professionals in terms of understanding technology. They are born with a smartphone today, and these things come to them very naturally. So the result was in this MasterCard experience that all these older generation employees have been able to master how to handle Twitter, how to handle their LinkedIn profiles, and how to also become savvy on the social media. And the takeaway for the older generation is they've understood how actually the youngsters are spending their money on. How are they spending money? What kind of a plastic money they are using? How much of credit cards they are using? That actually helped them to come out with the business strategies for an organization like MasterCard. Then we look at training. In terms of training, people like me, we've been used to classroom training over a period of time. We would love to go to some leadership development program, spend 5 days, 6 days locked in a classroom. But if you look at the younger generation today, their attention span is so limited, because I'm not talking this in terms of a negative trait, but then they have the knowledge and information at their fingertips, at the press of a button. So since their attention span is so low, today organizations like us, we are looking at bite-sized learning, self-directed learning, learning at their own time, things like MOOC, YouTube, where so many programs are available at free of cost to these generations, things like Khan Academy. These are all catching up with the younger generation. So we need to be alive. How do we actually structure our training interventions in the organization to suit to the different generations at workplace? And the next thing I would like to talk about is the traits of these younger generation is they are very confident, independent, they are very entrepreneurial, and they are risk-taking. So how do we actually put them on projects? So companies are today looking at allowing these youngsters to run their own projects because their ownership levels are very high. But then at the same time, the tendency to commit mistakes because of lack of experience also is on the higher side. So what organizations are looking at today is allow some older employees to mentor them during these projects, not breathing down upon their neck or micromanaging them. They're actually owning these projects. And then intervene whenever they think this project is not going in the right direction and coach them and guide them in terms of putting them in the right direction. I think these are some of the things which I thought I should share with you.